My name's Andrew Turner. I'm currently actually associate. I'm the CTO of Fortius One building GeoCommons, and also I'll talk through some on Manufacture. It was a project that company started a couple years ago that's now part of Fortius One. So let's see if it advances to the next slide. So there should be GeoWeb showing up. There we go. Still a little slow. Great. So a little bit we'll talk about the GeoWeb, just kind of how this is formulating what's going on in the space. So the GeoWeb is it's following along with the similar concept with what's going on with the web. This idea of interlinked documents that are being shared and linked to and linking to one another. So a lot of this information that was part of this kind of dark web was locked away in intranets, was difficult to get to. A lot of governments have this data starting to come online and being shared and being linked to. And so one of the big things is actually making this actually findable where it might have been posted to local groups before is it's becoming much more web-aligned. So the idea that that people are using these lightweight formats to interlink documents is the same thing that made the web work with links, linking from one document set to another. So the same kind of concepts popping up with geospatial information, the ability you can have, say, an HTML view of some demographics data or review information linking to, say, a more complex geospatial format. Now, two formats that have really started to make this difference is one's called GRSS. So this is a very, very lightweight format that makes it easy to take RSS or Atom, which most websites now usually use to syndicate, so a lot of news agencies, a lot of blogs will do this. It adds a tiny bit of geographic information, and then all of a sudden now all your content is now geographically tagged and now renderable on a map and searchable. It was a community-grown standard, so it really kind of bought into and promoted the idea of this geospatial tagging to the non-geospatial experts. So web developers and managers could really understand how easy it was now to geographically share their information. Another format that really had an amazing uptake is KML. This is a keyhole markup language that came out of the Google Earth, the original developers behind Google Earth, and now Google has now put into the OGC to be an open format. And the OGC is the Open Geospatial Consortium. So now it's outside of Google. It's an industry standard now that allows for much richer visualization of geographic information. Most popularly, people render it in Google Earth, but there are a lot of other clients showing up that make it very easy to share this information. So it's another way that a lot of this information is coming online in open format to be shareable. So in the end, what this kind of enables now is this concept of like this geostack. So you might have a number of applications out there, and I'll go through these by industry, where someone can maybe create data. So this is like your camera being able to share its geotagged photographs or a Flickr. People can then publish these on their blogs, put it in Blogger, and link to it. Then various engines and stuff can come along and aggregate that, whether it's in Everyblock or Google or Manufacture can aggregate this information, and then other tools and stuff can consume it. So it means along the value chain, there are a number of different companies and applications that can come together and share and provide a certain niche service, and then very easily connect the information using these open formats and maybe more complex ones as appropriate. So sometimes an expert might come along and say, I need it in WFS, which is Web Feature Service, or shapefiles, or something other more complex. But because these formats are very interchangeable, you can kind of service to those different customers very easily. In the end, if you actually start looking at this, it means there's a huge amount of information. This is actually, in Google Earth, if you turn on the entire GeoWeb link and data and layers, you start getting it's very apparent how much information now is being shared. I mean, you're pulling in complex base data, say real estate plots, as well as dynamic, up-to-date information, weather information, reviews, magazine stories, people tracking. So there's a huge amount of information now being made available on the web. So what this really means is it's really pushing this idea of this open data, that the data necessarily isn't locked away anymore. It's being both findable and then actually shareable for lower or actually free of cost. They're beginning to question the actual what the value is anymore of the data. This is becoming very, very important, when you start looking at things like Google Maps or other mapping applications, where people are becoming, this is the way they're interacting with data. And they're not quite, they're just beginning to start running these barriers now, where they're realizing the proprietariness of some of this data. So if you look at Google Maps, it's actually the data underneath there is being provided by Navteq or TELUS, or some of these major global data providers. And so they're very restrictive terms of service on what you can do with this. Can you use it behind an intranet? Can you use it in a publication? Can you, how can you share? What can you do with this information? Is being very much restricted by these different data providers.
Hey, Andrew.
Yes.
This is Catherine.
So part of what's driving that terms of service and this restricted uses is someone collecting this data, collecting this road data, and keeping it up to date can be very, very expensive. You start looking at some of the collection routines about having people literally drive around in specialized vehicles collecting this data and having to clean it up and qualify it, because it starts becoming very, very expensive, especially as people start building out new roads, new infrastructure. So the demand is going higher, but the costs are also going higher. At the same time, you can also now look at that these major data providers that I mentioned, Navteq and Telatlas, have recently been acquired by Nokia and TomTom, respectively. So you start seeing the major data providers have now been consumed or acquired, are now part of these specific manufacturers and device, both collectors and manufacturers. So now the question becomes, these other companies like Google and other derivative products that were reliant on these companies are now starting to become beholden to who their customers were. So the kind of value chain has been distorted about who owns this data or how to get to this data, how much it's going to cost. So one response to this is the OpenStreetMap Project. This is a global project where people are actually going around and collecting data. They're actually collecting, driving around on streets. They are, hopefully it should advance, pulling together open geo-databases. They are, and then making this all shareable under a Creative Commons license. Should advance. It's doing so well that Flickr now is actually using it as its base maps in areas where it didn't otherwise have geographic quality. No longer do you necessarily have to make the case for why you have to go and spend a large amount of money to send out a vehicle to go collect data in an area. If there are people on the ground who care about it, and these could still be surveying, these could still be professionals, they could be citizens. It's kind of the Wikipedia approach of geographic data. They're collecting all this data. So they're deciding by their involvement to collect this data in areas that otherwise might not be market viable right now. But that means companies can come along and actually use this information now, so they don't have to necessarily go and send out people to collect this data. So as I mentioned, this is actually a global project. This is coverage as of January 1st this year. So the U.S. actually pulled in a lot of the free government data. Europe is being largely done, and now under the Inspire and other directives is now being able to share their data. And so now they're really driving to start collecting areas that are poorly served by both commercial providers and free data, and starting to help people gather of the Web 2.0 space. You can start pointing out the various services that are now sharing out geographic information. So you have your typical ones you think of, like Frapper, which is FriendMapper, or Wayfaring, which is people sharing things, but kind of ones you wouldn't necessarily think of before. So YouTube now has geotagging, so you can actually geotag photographs. Wikipedia has geotagged articles. Yelp has geotagged restaurant reviews. And so a lot of these services are all starting to realize that geographic data has a huge value to the underlying service, and so are starting to allow their users to create and geotag information and share it out. At the same time, municipalities are starting to do this. I'm working on a project where there are counties around Detroit that are actually allowing their users and their citizens to mark out greenway and paths, about helping inform the city about where they should put in better walkways, better parks, and actually build and collaborate and share both between the government and other citizens this kind of data. It's a huge value here in allowing users to start creating and sharing their data. This is really great in disaster response. As part of the hurricane season this year, we actually started to describe a huge amount of information here about their location and freely sharing this information out. So this project team, what friends are around me, how do I get to the metro system, and when's the next time the next train is coming, so I can kind of plan out my routes. And so it's really interesting to start looking at some of these really specific, you wouldn't necessarily consider otherwise geolocatable apps, but them all kind of micro apps to users. And also let them kind of go and explore the data.
Wow. Let's see here. One gentleman is asking, he says we're in a tornado of information coming online, but there's a fundamental lack of noise, and timeliness are always expensive. How can good data express cost while the calls for free information get louder? To get the sense of what he's saying.
I believe, you can let me know if I'm right, that one of those points was how to get access to real-time data that's not like lagged by a certain amount, and then also that there's so much of this kind of just, like looking at, say, a comment in a blog. Like there might be one really good comment, but it's surrounded by 50 kind of like just people saying stupid things. So the question that with data, like how do you get it? Do you think that's what that question means?
Yes, I think so.
So I mean, it is definitely interesting. One answer that a lot of people will give you will be kind of just get better algorithms, and this is obviously Google where they started, but a lot of other people are trying to understand, apply better algorithms to it. So being able to understand the semantic of it, the semantic meaning of it. So if you look at MetaWeb's Freebase is starting to do this, PowerSet, and all these other people are trying to understand the information that's being generated. And then part of that is being able to filter out some kind of measure of quality. The other answer is to crowdsource. Is you just throw enough people at the problem. This is what OpenStreetMap has done. This is the same policy behind Wikipedia, is that you let anyone contribute the information they want, and the more people care about it, the more they'll actually come and correct it and actually will be custodians about it. Again, it's amazing what some people care about these niche things. So there will be people to kind of step up and kind of sort through a lot of this information and start providing good things on top of it. And so I think it's kind of that in-between, that kind of crowdsourcing of that information and letting people kind of bubble up and contribute enough information, and then applying some algorithms on top of it to kind of get to the data that you care from that, or how do you actually analyze when it's been contributed 1,000 times, is that actually a measure of good or not? And that's where it really starts depending on the specific niche application that you're trying to serve. In terms of timeliness, this is something that's, I think Twitter is really starting to kind of open the idea on, is the potential use of it, as well as the actual technological solutions behind it. So if you look recently, there was, I think it was this summer, there was an earthquake in Los Angeles. And there was a really interesting timeline that was published. Between the earthquake happening, the first Twitter was something like 30 seconds. And then the USGS reported about, I think it was like 5 minutes later. Now, they usually they go and corroborate, so that's why it takes a little bit longer. But it's still that kind of 30 seconds versus 5 minutes. And then the first AP news report, I think, was like 20 minutes later. So you start looking at actually it's getting better because the barriers to entry to publishing, broadcasting globally, real time, becomes so easy that it's actually going to be better and better and easier to get access to real-time data. And just Twitter is one of those kind of base-level mechanisms that people are starting to use. That kind of XMPP is one of the base technologies to kind of publish and broadcast this information. Anyone that wants that information can then selectively pull it in. And so then the next problem will be kind of this discoverability. If say, imagine every single device is starting to publish information, and this gets getting that signal and noise, is how do you kind of subscribe to it and follow it? And there are services, this is kind of what we're doing with Manufacture, was the kind of just building these kind of public registries of these things, and then make them sortable, and then let people kind of subscribe and listen to certain channels as they want to, and build up their own kind of quality scores.
Okay. Well, great explanation. So we're getting a bunch of questions in. I'll just keep going through them. One person has asked, this is from Ben. He said, we seem to have moved on from location hardware to services built upon GPS, cellular, Wi-Fi, etc. What do you see as the next level of abstraction upon this technology?
Yeah, that's definitely a good point. Kind of look at these services. Although I don't think the hardware's gone away. I think it's just kind of taken a back seat. The access to the existing devices has gotten so much easier that people kind of focus on that kind of services, the Fire Eagle, and for a while there's like JSR 179 is the Java spec for doing this. But the kind of abstraction layers that just you want to provide the developers the ability just to say, give me the location or give me the trajectory, be able to query just this kind of tell me about what's going on, and then give me some estimate of the quality of that measurement. You know, you're telling me that they're in the city and you only know to the city level, but you know they haven't moved here in 3 days. Okay, well at least I know, at least as the developer service, it doesn't matter usually to the service whether they had to ask the user to get that information, whether they looked at the sunlight or the GPS. To a lot of services, it doesn't matter. They just want to know the actual answer and then the quality of that answer. And so I think that'll kind of move up where, just in general, and that's that kind of open source components of being able to share Geo-Data and visualize that open layers, especially because it's a JavaScript API, so web developers can use it, and they can use it offline, which is something that you can't do with any of the other web mapping applications right now. But because you can use it offline, you can start using it potentially on mobile devices. You can use it in cases where you're going to be on an airplane, or in, say, again, like you're going to be doing business in Africa, and you can't rely on high-speed internet connection. So being able to cache and store that JavaScript locally without breaking terms of service and serve it off local map information is a huge benefit. Okay.
Crowdsourcing is great, but do you think that we should worry that the free labor is being exploited?
The upfront know the benefits and costs, and they can optionally contribute to it. The problem I end up having and seeing a big problem, routing and cartographic reprojection systems. So someone, because the data was open, they can actually do these really innovative applications on top of it. And so once you kind of stop that, that's when you are exploiting this crowdsourced data.
Okay, and here's the very location Detroit office on the map next to the new green walkway, and wanted to know who is mapping it. Who's doing that?
I'd say ping me offline, and it's something that'll be coming up and be made public in the next month and a half. Right now it's kind of closed beta.
Exciting.
Yeah, it's really exciting because I'm very hesitant because it'll be a free service and the data will be free, but it's one of those interesting things where you're starting to bring the GIS departments of several counties all kind of agreeing and sharing their data and willing to kind of accept citizen data. I mean, these are organizations that as much as they were serving the citizens weren't as much interested in hearing back from them. And so capabilities into these organizations and really show them the huge benefit by having, you only have 2 or 3 GIS people. So if you can have your entire citizenry kind of commenting back and doing it, there's a huge win for them because people all of a sudden start caring about it. They start all of a sudden taking care of the trails themselves without having to hire landscapers and things like that. And this has gone on. People are already using Yahoo groups around Detroit to do this. And so it's kind of just giving a nicer web interface, shared all out via KML kind of mechanism to do it, make it much more easy and visually rich.
Oh, nice.
So.
Now, we have a question from a gentleman in Latin America who's asking how can they start implementing these kind of services in Latin America? What do they need? So maybe you could give some advice on where to go for resources and how to get started.
Yeah, there's great. So if you look
OpenStreetMap, okay.
Yes. So OpenStreetMap.org, and you can look up. You can find say groups near an area. OSGeo, so the OSGEO.org, also has local chapters. So they'll have like local user group meet in either of those wikis. Those are very open communities where you can join their mailing list and email them, or join them on IRC, or somehow else contact them. And they're very willing to kind of help and point and directions on how to get involved in this kind of stuff.
Okay, excellent. Is presentation, if you're going to share your slides or if they can share this presentation with their colleagues. And I just want to say one more time that Andrew said that he does post all of his slides on SlideShare, which is wonderful. And you can also find them on his own website. And we're recording this event, and we'll have that available so you can watch the entire thing and listen to the questions also and listen, to the entire event. And that should be available. That usually takes us a few days to have edited and posted online, but I will send everyone an email once it's available.
Definitely, yeah. So they'll all be released under Creative Commons just by attribution.
Okay, excellent. And do you have time? You have time for a couple more questions, right?
Definitely, yes.
Okay. Well, let's see. One person asked very early on, and you'll have to go back to this topic, if the cost of Navigator, I think it is, TA data, is substantially associated with the cost of maintaining current data and detecting change. How does a project like OpenStreetMap provide a viable alternative?
You look at the, I don't want to imply that I think NavTech or Telos or obviously their subsequent services within these larger organizations will go away. I think CloudMade is the funded company that the 2 founders of OpenStreetMap now have a funded company to provide services on top of this free data. So now there's an actual commercial investment by them to actually make sure this data is gathered and shared and remains free. And then they provide them kind of SLAs and other commercial services on top of it. And you saw this happen. One of the 3rd or 4th largest data providers, a company called A&D, or Automotive Navigation Devices. They're based in the Netherlands. And they kind of saw this kind of trend of open data happening. They actually gave all of their data for the Netherlands to OpenStreetMap. So completely, like, the company was when they handed over, they said it was about 95. I think academic's been interesting. I just attended a seminar, or a web-based Webcast seminar with UCL, University College London, the other day. And they're doing a lot to kind of understand. She spoke at Where 2.0 about her research is looking at participation in understanding climate change. And so this kind of broader, like, now that you have the data available, you start having some really, really advanced tools available. What are the proper mechanisms for how you engage the public in using and experimenting with these tools, how they use and affect the space? Especially as technologists, we have to think about that. We do have a huge impact on society and on our users and their perceptions. And so being responsible for that impact. And so this is where I think academia is really starting to look at that and understand that. It's interesting, though, I think in national technology development, that's not where their expertise is. I mean, the companies are out there building these tools so fast, and the open source community is building them so fast that I don't think academia could ever keep up, but it's the kind of understanding, identifying certain niches or certain algorithms and being able to, now that they can go and participate with these communities, it means they don't have to become technology or scaling experts to be able to use their ideas and get them exposed to the broader public. So I think you'll see a much better pairing between technologists and companies and this academic experts.
Can you tell us who's working on the climate change tools?
It was Renee Cyber. She's working at McGill University, and there are a number of others. But if someone wants to ping me offline, I can definitely provide them with their contact information.
Okay, and everyone, Andrew has said that you can ping him offline. He put his email address up, so please feel free to do that. And I know we're running out of time, but here's a question. Someone asked, maybe this to be our last question, if you would like to briefly touch on the sensor web, and I'm just curious because I don't know what the sensor.
I think the difficulty will be obviously in just a huge volume of information, as well as kind of providing it, in the end, not just kind of overwhelming everybody or any.
Fascinating. This is an amazing area just to hear you talk about it. I had no idea that a lot of these things are in the works right now. I would love it if my car would tell me to turn off. The traffic jam is coming up.
Right.
Okay, well, it's shortly after 11 here, and I think we've used up our allotted time. So
yeah.
I just want to thank you for the great presentation. I'm glad we finally had it.
As I mentioned, it was in Africa, in Nairobi, and the realities of finding a decent high-speed connection is difficult there. So as Eric Hersman, who's a great technologist working on technology in Africa, said, if it works in Africa, it'll work anywhere.
You have a chance to win a free book. And once again, thank you very much, Andrew.